Let's take a look at solving quadratic equations by factoring. Okay, we've learned how to solve by graphing. Now we're going to look at solving by factoring. We don't always have access to Desmos or a graphing tool to make solving by graphing easier. And also, Desmos does not give us exact answers unless our solutions are integers like we saw in the examples that we did. So another way to solve is by factoring. Okay, so in many cases, we can find the solutions or roots, zeros, x-intercepts of a quadratic equation by factoring rather than graphing. So let's follow the steps. Step number 1. Set the quadratic equation equal to 0. So 0 equals x squared plus 3x minus 10. So I want to know, what can I put in there for x that will give me 0? Factor the left side. Well, based on how I wrote this, it would be the right side. So keeping your 0, okay, when we factor x squared plus 3x plus 10, I first always look for a greatest common factor. There isn't one. It is a trinomial of 3 terms with leading coefficient 1. So I'm thinking about, what do I multiply together to get negative 10 that adds to positive 3? Well, factors of 10 are 1 and 10, 2 and 5. Because I need to get a negative 10, 1 is positive, 1 is negative. Because my sum is a positive 3, that means the smaller number would have to be negative. If I add negative 1 and 10 together, will that give me 3? Nope. How about adding negative 2 and 5 together? Yeah, so my factors are x minus 2 times x plus 5. If I were to FOIL that out, I would get x squared plus 3x minus 10. So let's take a look at what we have. I am multiplying 2 things together, and I know the answer is 0. Well, if I'm multiplying something together and the answer is 0, that means one of them has to be 0. So step 3 tells us to set each factor equal to 0. So each factor is what I have in parentheses. So I'm going to set x minus 2 equal to 0, and my other factor of x plus 5 equal to 0. Then I solve each of these. Okay, get x by itself. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So x equals positive 2. And then on the other one, I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. So x equals negative 5. What that means is, if I put 2 into my original equation, if I take 2 squared plus 3 times 2, subtract 10, I would get 0. The same applies if I substitute in negative 5. Negative 5 squared plus 3 times negative 5, subtract 10, would also give me 0. I'm okay with leaving answers like this. This tells us to write your answer using curly braces. It would look like this. X is equal to 2 and negative 5. The reason we use curly braces instead of parentheses is we don't want our answer to look like a coordinate. Okay, we are listing possible x values or definitive x values that will make it equal to 0. We've got lots of examples to look at because I'm guessing some of us have forgotten how to factor. When we factor, here's a little note here. Don't forget the note. When we factor, first look for greatest common factor. Always, always, always. Don't forget that. Number 13, x squared plus 4x plus 3 equals 0. Okay, step number 1, set it equal to 0. It is equal to 0. Step number 2, factor the left side or the right side, depending on how it's written. So when I factor the left side, I've got a trinomial. Okay, I do not have a greatest common factor. My leading coefficient is 1. So what do I multiply together to get positive 3? That adds to positive 4. Well, my only factors of 3 are 1 and 3, and they're both going to be positive. So x plus 1 times x plus 3 equals 0. So my two factors are x plus 1 and x plus 3. Step 3 tells me to set each of those equal to 0 and solve. We can see that my two solutions are x equals -1 and x equals -3. Work through question 14 after hitting pause and then check your answer. My factors for number 14 are x plus 9 times x minus 3. I set each of those factors equal to 0 and solve. And I find that my solutions are x equals -9 and x equals positive 3. Number 15, what do we notice about this one? If you said it's not equal to 0, you are correct. So we need to make sure it's equal to 0. We always want to keep our x squared positive, so I'm going to keep my terms on the left-hand side. So I need to bring over this -25. So to do that, I'm going to add 25 to both sides. 25 is not a like term to either of those two terms, so I'm going to write it as x squared plus 10x plus 25 equals 0. Now it's just like 13 and 14. What do I multiply together to get 25? That adds to 10. 5 and 5. My factors are the same here, so I just need to set one of them equal to 0. If x plus 5 is equal to 0, subtract 5 from both sides. That means I only have one solution. Those were some crazy brackets. X equals -5. So if I were to graph that parabola, it would just touch the x-axis at one point, at -5. Let's look at number 16. As you can see, our equation is set equal to 0. So let's factor the left-hand side. Always, always look for your greatest common factor first. 3x squared plus 15x. I can see that I have a greatest common factor of 3x. What do I multiply by 3x to get 3x squared? X. What do I multiply by 3x to get 15x? Positive 5. My two factors are 3x and x plus 5. Step number 3 says set each factor equal to 0. So 3x equal to 0 and x plus 5 equal to 0. Get x by itself, divide both sides by 3. 0 divided by anything is 0. Subtract 5 from both sides. So my solutions are 0 and negative 5. Let's look at number 17. 4x squared minus 81 equals 0. I do not have a greatest common factor. I have two terms. So when we have two terms, there was a factoring method that we used to factor it. That was called the difference of squares. This is a difference problem because it is subtraction. And these are both perfect squares. What do we square to get 4x squared? 2x. What do I square to get 81? 9. So my two factors are 2x plus 9 and 2x minus 9. I set each of those equal to 0. I then need to get x by itself. So let's focus on the one on the left. 2x plus 9 equals 0. Let's use inverse operations. Subtract 9 from both sides first. And then divide both sides by 2. Negative 9 divided by 2 is not a whole number. On the other side, let's add 9. And then divide by 2. Well, negative 9 divided by 2 and 9 divided by 2, they're not integers, so we can actually leave our answers as fractions, and there's nothing to simplify there. So negative 9/2 and positive 9/2. I'd like you to try and work through, hit pause, and then work through 18, 19, and 20. Remember, set your equation equal to 0 first. Compare your answers for 18, 19, and 20. Select pause to freeze the screen and compare yours with these. Number 21. 3x squared plus 9x subtract 12 equals 0. When we factor, we first always look for our greatest common factor. Of my three terms, they all three are divisible by 3, so my greatest common factor is 3. What do I take times 3 to get 3x squared? That's x squared. What do I take times 3 to get 9x? That's 3x. And what do I take times 3 to get minus 12? That is minus 4. Now I'm going to take a look at what's in parentheses and factor that further. My leading coefficient is 1, so I'm thinking about what do I multiply together to get negative 4? That adds to 3. Okay, make sure you put your GCF on the outside. What multiplies to negative 4 and adds to 3? That would be positive 4 and negative 1. Now to find my solutions, I set each factor equal to 0. I technically have 3 factors. But my factor on the outside of 3